my grandpa said, he's like, oh, that used to be the cat house, which is, of course, another term for a brothel. But me, as a child, I didn't know that. So I just thought there was a bunch of cats there. So I went back. I wanted to go see the cats. Hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestel.
And this is the show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 218, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul Damien Bestel, my friend, how you doing?
I'm okay, my friend. I'm okay. I'm a bit throaty today. I've had this weird viral infection from somewhere, but we're okay now. We're over the worst of it, he says, touching wood.
Well, my friend, I'm glad you're still here, and I'm glad you're feeling better. I sure as hell could not do this without you.
Yes, I'm okay, thanks. I'm okay. I've cheered myself up with a new football shirt and some top-level aftershave.
Well, that always feels good.
Yes, it certainly does, apart from the wallet, the bank balance, but yes.
Well, I mean, it's 2025. Our wallets always hurt. What the hell's the difference?
Yes, it's always nice to treat yourself to some new scent.
Yeah, absolutely. What'd you get?
I've got the new Boss Citrus Summer.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah, by the way, this advert is not sponsored by Boss, unfortunately. I wish it was.
Boss, Uniqlo, Hoka shoes, reach out. We are poor and we will sell out for stuff. Well, as for me, I did not buy any new cologne. I'm still trying to get the last dregs out of my two different Tom Ford scents that I use. I did, however, continue my trend of finding ghost stories in unlikely places. And this time, the unlikely place is, I've been reading the book, The Last American Road Trip, by the journalist Sarah Kendzior. And I've mentioned before on the show that I'm a fan of Sarah's work. She is a brilliant journalist. I think she's gifted with the curse of pattern recognition. She's been prognosticating the current troubles for close to 10 years. No one has listened. Everything she has predicted, or I would say most of what she has predicted has come to pass. And not in that way of certain podcasters who will just, say anything for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and eventually, hit the dartboard once or twice. Sarah is a very intelligent, very incisive, well-researched journalist. Really great stuff. There's also a Welsh guy I'm a big fan of, Ioan Grillo. He reports on cartels out of Mexico City. And if we have any people in the audience whose interests cross over between ghosts and crime cartels, then Ioan Grillo is your guy. Great books, great reporting in his Substack. But anyways, regardless, the Kendzior thing. So like I said, I'm reading Last American Road Trip, and she talks about stopping with her family at the Crescent Hotel in, I think, Eureka Springs. She was walking with her daughter, and now Sarah Kendzior, as I understand it, she doesn't necessarily believe in the paranormal, but she's open to it. She's not set one way or the other against it. And her daughter came upon an area where, if I remember right, there was a string from a lamp, like a drawstring or something, that was moving seemingly independently of any breeze. And they began speaking to it, and it began responding according to what the daughter set out. She said, if it's yes, do X. If it's no, do Y. And it seemed to be responding. These were not movements that could have been explained simply by a breeze. It actually seemed to be responding. And what they gathered was it was someone who had passed in the hotel. And there is, again, a handful of other details. I won't spoil it. The book is very good. It's melancholy, but it's very good. But they had a genuine paranormal experience in this hotel. And the details, the scant few details that the daughter was able to get from these simple experiments, Sarah was able to verify using historical sources at the hotel. So it seems like they had a genuine experience. It freaked them the hell out. But it's very, very cool stuff. And again, in a place you don't expect to find it. Because like I said, Last American Road Trip, great book, but somber. And very much about what she believes to be the end of the American experiment, or the coming end. And the last place you expect to find a ghost.
Was that at the Crescent?
Yeah, Crescent.
Yeah, that has a reputation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 218 is the infamous room there, I think. Because I think somebody when they were building it fell off the top and died where room 218 is.
Oh, shit. Okay, yeah, so that might have been how she confirmed it.
Yeah. Well, it does advertise itself as the most haunted hotel in the world.
Well, and as we said, when people say stuff like that, it's always true. You know, I am the undisputed king of chest hair.
Absolutely. I'm the most successful podcaster in this room.
What a coincidence. Me too.
Spooky.
And then Joe Rogan rises up from behind me with a knife in his teeth.
When's that massage gun?
Oh, Christ, the massage gun. Yeah, I had to move that out of frame when we had Cryptid Cocktail Party on the show because the last thing I needed was questions about that thing.
Looked like that thing that Austin Powers had.
That's not my bag, baby.
And here's a book that says, "That's my bag, baby."
Oh, man. Shades of 1997.
Yes, the only good Austin Powers film.
Yep, that too. Followed by the cruel train wrecks that were Spy Who Shagged Me and Goldmember. Ask your parents, kids, or maybe don't, because it's probably better those films are forgotten. All right. Well, we are not here to talk about the Austin Powers films or the lost dream of the 90s. Instead, we are here to tell stories from the Canadian province of Manitoba. Manitoba, of course, the second province from the prairies that we've talked about after Saskatchewan on our last story episode. And much like Saskatchewan, Manitoba is a sparsely populated province with a population of about 1.3 million, most of which, or rather I should say about half of which, is centered around the Winnipeg metropolitan area. And it is home to some of Canada's, I would argue, most iconic bands. They've got Bachman Turner Overdrive, The Guess Who, and of course, my personal favorite, the Crash Test Dummies. Yep, that's exactly them.
Yes, always reminds me of the mid-90s, that band.
Me too, man. Me too. Crash Test Dummies remind me of the 90s. And Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles reminds me of 2001. I used it as the background for a song on Instagram, or pardon me, a post on Instagram recently. And it occurred to me that I think no matter how old I get, as soon as I hear the opening notes of 1,000 Miles, I'll always be 18 again. It's just, it's fucking magic that way. But before we can tell stories about haunting in Manitoba, we have to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. For real, guys. Every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. I know I say that all the time, but it's true. However, patrons who support us financially are the ones who truly allow this great machine to keep moving. And I know it's hard times right now. We're in a recession, money's tight, so we don't expect everyone to be able to support us. But honestly, if even 10% of our monthly listeners were able to support us financially, it would be life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. But as it is, we're deeply grateful for the folks who do support us. And while we'd like to thank every single one of them, we would especially like to thank our latest ones. They are
Andrew Fryer,
Adam Freed,
Tara,
ASDFGHJKL.
That's why I went straight in.
Yeah, I know you did, you son of a bitch.
I don't spell things on Thursdays.
Again, thank you from the bottom of our terrible hearts. And if you would like to be thanked here in this segment, while also getting access to early ad-free releases, bonus conversations between myself and Paul, extra shows, our monthly live stream, and of course our Ghost Force shoutouts, you can click the link in the show notes, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or become a friend of the cabin via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Again, to get all of that good stuff, click the link in the show notes, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or sign up to be a friend of the cabin via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. All right, my friend, gird your loins, for we are about to stretch not very many stories from Manitoba into a full-length show with a little help from aliens and some psychic grifters. All right, so On this episode, as with Saskatchewan, stories were very thin on the ground. As such, we are going to a book that I think if you're a fan of ghost stories, you should pick up. If you like heavily regional ghost stories, it is called Haunted Manitoba by Matthew Comas. And we're going to be excerpting a handful of things from that book. There is a massive amount of stuff in the rest of the book. And again, I encourage you to pick it up. I bought a PDF copy or an EPUB copy for $10, and you can get that at greatplainspress.ca. Again, that's greatplainspress.ca. The book is Haunted Manitoba, Ghost Stories from the Prairies. And I'm going to mention it again later in the show because, again, we've pulled a couple stories from there. But great read if you are a fan of hyper-regional Canadian ghost stories, or just hyper-regional ghost stories. If you, like Paul or myself, are obsessive about checking local stores for ghost books when you go somewhere, definitely give Haunted Manitoba a peek. And this first section is about a place called Fort Garry, specifically Lower Fort Garry, and a place there called Ross Cottage. And now we're going to explain to you using the words of Matthew Comas, or a condensed version of Matthew's words, to explain what Fort Garry is or was. In 1826, Upper Fort Garry, located in Winnipeg's downtown, was damaged during spring flooding. In his illustrated history of the fort, a good, solid, comfortable establishment. Jesus, Paul, that sounds like a boring book. Graham MacDonald says, for George Simpson, the governor of Rupert's Land, the 1826 disaster was a convenient one. He had a number of reasons for contemplating the establishment of a new base of operations some distance north of the Forks. This flood provided the necessary excuse to proceed. Simpson provided a number of official reasons for the necessity of a new fort. It would be closer to Lake Winnipeg and below the rapids of St. Andrews, and it would be a higher ground, so less prone to flooding. The location was also near a ready supply of wood and limestone. All these details may have been the official reason for the fort's construction. However, the actual reason may have been something far more personal. Governor Simpson, like many men in the fur trade, had a country wife, or in his case, wives. As there were very few European women in Western Canada, many of the men employed in the fur trade looked to First Nations or Métis women for companionship. Though not officially recognized as such, these relationships were just like a marriage. In many cases, the relationship lasted for a lifetime and resulted in numerous children. There were, however, countless examples where the women were treated no better than property and cast aside as soon as a European woman became available for marriage. Located near the Red River just outside Lower Fort Garry's stone walls is a small, whitewashed cottage. Built around 1840, Ross Cottage was home to a number of Hudson's Bay Company employees and their families over the years. During the building's restoration, the cottage was renamed in honor of Hudson's Bay Company chief factor of Norway House, Donald Ross. In 1829, Ross was appointed chief trader, and for many years oversaw HBC operations at Norway House. He and his wife were considered very strong personalities. Mary, the daughter of one of the original Selkirk settlers, was unwilling to conform to cultural and social norms of Red River society. In a community intent on reinforcing notions of racial superiority, for example, she encouraged her children to learn Indigenous languages, as she had in her youth. Her unorthodox attitude often put her at odds with the other residents. The Rosses moved to the stone fort in 1851. Donald Ross would pass away the following year from tuberculosis. Over the decades, other residents would come and go, but eventually the cottage sat empty. In the early 1970s, shortly after Lower Fort Garry was opened to the public, Parks Canada began restoration work on Ross Cottage. An early step in the restoration process was turning the site over to a group of archaeologists. The archaeologists intended to study the building and surrounding area and learn more about the past. They had not been at work long when strange things began to happen. A trowel placed down in one spot would be found in a different location. A ruler disappeared, only to be found later back in its original spot. These occurrences all seemed relatively harmless, and little thought was given to them until one night when, after a long day of work that continued on into the evening, one of the archaeologists, too tired to bother going home, decided to spend the night in the cottage. Apparently, he had a night he would not forget, with items moving around the room, soft moaning sounds, and the sound of a young child coughing outside the back door throughout his overnight stay. Through a series of circumstances, the team ended up meeting a woman who described herself as a psychic medium. They invited her back to the cottage. The medium went into a trance and soon made contact with a young girl. The girl claimed this was her house. This surprised the archaeologists as they were unaware of any young children having lived in the home. Further research, however, led to the discovery that the building once had been used as a sanatorium for sick children suffering from tuberculosis. Perhaps the ghostly girl was distraught over all the changes happening to her home. Or maybe she was not so used to many people being in the small space. No matter the reason, she was certainly not finished making her presence known. With the archaeological and restoration work now complete, staff began to focus on placing all the historic furniture and artifacts into the home. Work was progressing smoothly, which was good, as only a few days remained before the cottage would open to the public for the very first time. As it was getting late and only a handful of last-minute tasks remained, the workers decided to lock up for the night. The next morning, 2 of the crew arrived early. They were in a good mood, pleased that after so much effort they were almost done. As they opened the front door, they could feel their skin begin to tingle and crawl. Then, according to a witness, their jaws began to drop. The whole house was in shambles. It looked as if a hurricane had blown through it. Tables were turned over, curtains were ripped off their hooks. The men were shocked and angry at all the pointless destruction, first thinking that vandals had broken in during the night. Very faintly, they could hear a soft creaking sound. According to Fort staff, it was only when they began to survey the damage that the men noticed that the rocking chair in the corner of the parlor was moving ever so slightly. In it was a young girl, barely 10, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. She was rocking back and forth, staring at the men and murmuring softly, "I'm so sorry about the mess. So sorry for the mess." This was too much, and the men bolted from the cottage. They soon gathered up a larger group of workers, and everyone returned there. As they opened the door, all the witnesses could clearly see the upturned furniture and the objects scattered carelessly around. But the rocking chair, still moving ever so slightly, was now empty. And just before we move on to the next story, because we have a story also from the warehouse at Lower Fort Garry, I just want to say I left in some of those historical details because I think it's relevant to the story. I think that it's important to understand, if we're going to talk about the history of Canada, I think it's important to understand that a lot of the folks who were already here were treated very badly. You know, they were good enough to be essentially romantic companionship, but not good enough to have their culture in any way maintained or remembered or respected. And I think it's always a good idea to remember that. And again, no one's asking anyone to feel bad about this, but you can't forget this is how things were conducted back then, because it informs our modern, as with so much as with all history, it informs our modern situation.
Absolutely. There are many different levels to ethnic cleansing.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that is another form of genocide, is to erase a people's history.
We try and breed them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
As they did in Australia as well.
Of course, yeah. Honestly, in a lot of ways, the histories of Canada and Australia are not dissimilar that way.
I wonder what country connects them both. I can't place it now. Anyway.
Kneecap creeps into the frame.
Bloody French.
All right, so next up, Paul's going to tell us a story from the warehouse at Lower Fort Garry.
The warehouse. Some types of buildings seem more prone to hauntings than others. There are countless haunted houses and hotels, but we rarely hear of a haunted warehouse. In many ways, a warehouse is rather a dull building. Not so much happens in a building whose sole purpose is the storage of goods. However, when a warehouse has always been a military barracks, penitentiary and mental asylum, dull is maybe not the right word. Lower Fort Garry's warehouse is located near the north wall of the fort, a large 2.5-storey structure. It was built from locally sourced limestone around 1840. Lower Fort Garry required more storage than the typical fur trading fort because of the nearby farming settlement. The company stored grains and vegetables for later use. It was also used to store provisions from York factory that were being sent on to Upper Fort Garry. Supplies were often unloaded at the lower fort because unless the water level was high, rapids prevented the ships from reaching the upper fort. When they were required, the supplies would be taken by Red River cart to the upper fort. Besides being used as a warehouse, the building has a unique role in Canadian history as the first ever barracks for the Northwest Mounted Police, which is now the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. As the federal government began to assert more control over the West, they realised they would need a police force to accomplish this. Formed in 1873, the Northwest Mounted Police recruited out east. The new recruits then trekked down to Lower Fort Garry for training before being sent further west. Accommodations were required to house all the recruits, and the warehouse was selected for this purpose. The newly formed force also used the big house, a newly constructed sales shop, and many smaller buildings. As trails connecting St. Paul, Minnesota with the Red River settlement grew, many goods started to arrive from the south as opposed from the north. This new trade route made the warehouse obsolete. There was, however, a demand for the building. The rising population of the settlement had led to an increase in crime. Many different buildings had been used for makeshift jails, but none seemed adequate for the job. The newly formed province needed a proper facility to house prisoners, and in 1871 the warehouse opened as the provincial penitentiary. Cells were built within its walls, and a wooden stockade was constructed around the building. 6 years later, in 1877, Stony Mountain Penitentiary officially opened its doors. The warehouse did not sit long empty, as the building was converted into an insane asylum. At this time, people suffering from mental illness were treated as badly, or even worse than the convicted prisoners. The fort can be a spooky place to be at night, but sometimes special events or other duties require staff to be on site late. On one such occasion, 2 employees were walking past the warehouse. One of the workers noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. She stopped walking and looked up at the building and saw a man glaring down at her from a 3rd-story window. The building was locked and no one was inside at the time. It was dark, and she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, so she said nothing to her co-worker. The next day, however, she overheard the woman she'd been with telling everyone that she'd seen a man in the 3rd-floor window, but had been too scared to say anything the night before. The fact that they'd both seen the man confirmed it was more than just an illusion. There have been other incidents with this secretive man. Over the years, several different people have reported seeing the man glaring down at them. There are many different ghosts at the fort, and in most cases, little, if anything, is known of the identity of the apparitions. This is not the case in the warehouse, as there's a strong suspicion about the identity of that 3rd-floor ghost. In the 1870s, Thomas Slack was hired to work as a turnkey in the newly opened penitentiary. A turnkey is an old term for a jailer, or what would now be called a corrections officer. As jobs were hard to come by in Europe, Slack travelled to the Red River settlement, hoping for better opportunities. His wife and children remained behind in Europe until he could earn enough money for them to come over and join him. Like many European workers in the Red River settlement, Slack had a country wife. This only became an issue in 1873 when he received a letter from his English wife. She wrote to him with exciting news. A relative of hers had passed away, and she'd inherited a sizable amount of money. With these newly acquired funds, she and the children would be setting sail for Canada. This news clearly would have come as a shock to Slack, but what made it even worse was that the letter had been delayed. His wife and children were scheduled to arrive in only a few days. According to the staff at the fort, Slack entered a temporary fit of insanity, not knowing what to do about his country wife. It's then rumoured he went to the 3rd floor of the warehouse and took his own life. To this day, it's unclear how Thomas Slack carried out his suicide. Some stories say he hung himself, and others that he shot himself. Perhaps there was more than one suicide that took place in the warehouse, and those stories have become jumbled together. During the summer months, Parks Canada uses historically costumed interpreters to share the fort's history with the public. Interpreters who have been working in the warehouse have had feelings of being watched. One interpreter was talking with a family when they asked about the costumed man stood behind her. She was unsure what they meant, as there were no male costumed interpreters in the building. She quickly turned around to find no one there. After the summer season, the fort remains open for tours by appointment only, and there are no longer any costumed interpreters working in the buildings. One fall, an interpreter unlocked the warehouse to show his tour group the interior, and once inside, the group went upstairs to the 2nd floor. It was there that the interpreter heard footsteps coming from the 3rd floor. At first he tried to ignore the sound, Just a short time later, he realised again he'd heard footsteps, this time sounding like that person was wearing riding boots. He realised his tour group had also heard the steps. Unaware of anyone else working in the building, he decided to investigate and entered the 3rd floor. As soon as he climbed the stairs, he called out, "Who's there?" And upon hearing no response, he made a thorough search of the room, but there was no sign of any stranger. Another odd occurrence was that one day one of the window panes went missing. The historic windows at the fort are made up of several small panes of glass. This is because it was difficult to manufacture and transport those large glass panes. Now, a pane of glass itself falling out is not all that strange. Over the decades, the wood could have warped, causing the glass to fall out. What was bizarre about this episode, however, was that the glass was not found right below the window, but a long way away from the building on the other side of the big house fence. And even stranger, it was completely unbroken.
Those are all from Lower Fort Garry, which is about 40 minutes outside of Manitoba. Outside of Winnipeg, rather. And the author says in the book, Matthew Comas says that there's only one story he was able to find from Upper Fort Garry, which is actually in downtown Winnipeg. And that story, again, we'll leave it for you folks to check out the book. Again, it's only $10. What I think is interesting is Upper Fort Garry in downtown Winnipeg is right next door to the Fort Garry Hotel. And the Fort Garry Hotel is one of those sort of grand hotels they built around the turn of the century. I think it was finished in 1913 it was a railway motel, or hotel rather. So it was built by the Grand Trunk. It was a Grand Trunk Railroad Company. But that hotel is probably one of the most famously haunted places in all of Winnipeg, the Fort Garry. Room 202 is allegedly sort of the locus of it, but there are a number of anecdotal accounts of haunting from all around that hotel. So it may not be in the fort, but it definitely seems like that whole area is just covered in ghost inactivity, which sort of is interesting when you add in the flooding aspect.
Yes. My main question is, I think I understand, but what's a country wife?
Oh, so that's from the first story, that when you take like a First Nations or a Métis woman as your country wife.
I presume that's what it meant.
Yeah.
But I'd never come across the term before, but that was my presumption on it. So, yes, well, that'll teach Thomas to be a dirty bugger, won't it?
It sure will, yes.
He certainly wasn't that slack in other departments, was he?
It's weird how some guys they'll find the energy when it comes to certain projects, we'll say.
Yes, absolutely. Some would say he met his deserved end.
That's right. So if any of you out there have country wives, we're coming for you.
Stop it.
Stop it. Yes, stop it. Unless everyone knows what page you're on, do not do this.
I ever tell you about that time one of my friends I used to know many years ago brought his mistress out for the night?
Nope.
And I was drunk and I kept calling his mistress his partner's name all night. No. And nobody told me until they went. No. And then they went, "You do know that's not Sarah, that's Claire." And I went, "You what?"
Oh my God.
Because they look quite similar as well.
Yikes.
And then they went, well, I thought it was hilarious, so I just left it.
Oh God.
And to be fair, end of the day, it's not my fault. I'm not the one having a fling.
Well, there is that. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've told you this before. I used to work with a guy, or for him rather. And we were invited to this one particular gala event. It was a big deal. And so we went, and I get there, I'm taking pictures, and he's there with his fucking mistress. And I said, "Are you fucking crazy?" And he said, "Well, no one knows. No one knows. They don't know me. They don't know my world. Who gives a shit?" And I just like, "You stupid." Those pictures ran. They ran. The man has skirted death so many times. And folks, to understand, we don't condone this behavior. This is a bad idea. This is gross. But it is shockingly common. But yeah, and then another time he wanted to show me he offered to show me the South Asian side of the Lower Mainland over in Vancouver, which was very educational. It was an interesting trip. But I told him, I said, "I can't really afford a hotel." He said, "Oh no, that's fine. I'm staying at my friend's place as well. You can just crash on the couch." So I get there, and he says, on the way in, he's like, "Don't tell anyone which apartment you're staying in." Well, this seems suspicious. And we get there, and I look at the pictures on the table. It's his fucking mistress's house. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Keep your trousers on, mate.
He's a great journalist and a terrible husband.
Oh, it's a crazy world.
Yeah, I'm going to sit here, write scary stories, and eat this Palm Bay freezy. Actually, before we go on to the next story, you'll appreciate this. So you know that I am completely useless when it comes to detecting the interest of anyone in me, just because I'm not functional that way. So, of course, on the episode that'll be out next week, where we talk to the guys from Cryptid Cocktail Party, I tell a story about another humorous sauna encounter that happened recently. Well, I had yet another one, not in the sauna this time, but a friend of mine was having a bad day. So I knew I was going to be seeing them later. So I knew they like these. They're basically like alcoholic slushies. They come in a bag.
Yeah.
So I went and bought a few of them from the liquor store. Was going to put them in the freezer. You know, we'll have them later on when they come over. So I was coming back from the liquor store with 4 of these things in my arms, and I used my remote to open the car when I was still a fair distance away. Well, there was this gentleman, probably I would say in his mid-60s, who was standing next to this white Toyota adjacent to my car. And he looked confused for a second, and then he saw me, and he went, "Oh, okay." He said, I was wondering what was going on. I heard the car click, and I thought I'd done something wrong. And he looked at the armful of brightly colored coolers I had with me. And I said, no, you're good. I said, "It's just me." I popped the trunk. I tossed him in. I said, "Don't worry, you haven't offended the car gods." He goes, "What if I want to offend the car gods?" And he gave me a look. I didn't catch it because I'm useless at this stuff. So I just said, "Oh, you can't offend a Mitsubishi." And I just closed my trunk and got my car. And he had this look on his face, and I couldn't parse what it was he was expressing. And then I realized it was just like, what the fuck just happened, followed by disappointment. And I realized, that gentleman was flirting. And I flirted back, and then I just shut him the fuck down without realizing.
Not today.
That's right. So yeah, the further adventures of Brennan getting lots of attention that he doesn't want. My middle-aged quest.
Disappointing gay men across Canada. Way to go, baby.
So next up, we have a series of smaller stories from a couple different spots around Manitoba. And the first set is from Portage La Prairie. I believe it's around 14,000 people, 14,000 people.
Henry Clark House. The Henry Clark House was built by Clark himself in 1885, and he was my great-grandfather. They had many children, and Henry built a house for each of them. My grandfather's house itself is still standing. My great-grandmother died there in 1908. My other cousins have lived there as well, and they reported seeing a woman in old-fashioned dress looking in on their bedrooms at night. A baby girl that was born during the Great Flu epidemic was premature and sadly died and was buried out in the bush. My cousin tried to make a waterfall out there, but quickly gave it up because of strange happenings they reported. We figured that it was from the grave of the baby who died from the flu epidemic. Not too long ago, someone burnt it down. The last homeowner was suspected, as the Irish lamp from Belfast that was in there was gone when it had been burnt. When you drive past the house at sunset, you could see spectacular orbs from all around the house. Another former resident chimed in. I was around 7 when I moved there. I remember my mum telling me there were 3 adult spirits, John, Elizabeth and Henry. Elizabeth stayed upstairs and I'd see her often. I think Henry was in the basement and John was outside or vice versa. My sister saw him when she was cleaning out one of the rooms she wanted to sleep in down in the basement. She said that she'd seen a man holding something and his head looked like it was hanging off his body in a plaid shirt. My brother and I one night in winter were playing on a big snow hill at the garage when suddenly we heard, "Time to come in." We thought it was my stepdad and we saw him standing at the house waving us in. He'd disappeared by the time we got there, so we went in and asked our dad if he'd called us. And Mum said no, he was still at work. They used to tell us that they were good spirits that protected us. I remember once, though, being told that the house was cursed and whoever lived there would always fight. It was true for my family. I'd often feel something brushing my hair when I cried. I'd always like to think that it was Elizabeth trying to soothe me. My mum would often see strange things too, such as children playing with toys through the reflection in the TV screen when it was turned off. Once she saw 3 children standing at the end of the couch she was sitting on, and they all looked like me and my siblings, and we asked her to come and play when we were all at school. I've also heard it being called the House of the Rising Sun. I remembered when people came to the house and put some little orange flags down where the bodies were buried. I don't know if it's true, but I was told that the mother and baby were buried together under that mound in the backyard. It was beautiful with the rocks outlining it, and we'd run water down the rock path like a little waterfall. I had some vivid nightmares there too, and the night before we left was the most memorable, for how old I was to remember those memories the most, but I loved that house more than anything. The one thing that was most disturbing was once me and my brother saw that the birds were constantly flying into the windows and dying. My brother... what the fucking hell? What? Whose memories are these? Ted Bundy's? Jesus. The one thing I found most disturbing was that me and my brother, when we lived there, sometimes birds would constantly fly into the windows and die, and so me and my brother would go out and cut off their beaks to collect them. I've no idea why we'd ever do such a thing. It was definitely something we never did before, and we certainly didn't do after living there either. I've never heard of anybody cutting the birds off beaks off dead birds.
No, that's weird. And I look, I mean, kids do weird shit. I get it. I wouldn't share that.
No.
I think I would just leave out that part of the story.
No. No thanks.
That's like when someone tells you a little bit about their childhood and they're like, oh, that's just a funny story, right? And you're like, no.
Yes.
No, that was abuse.
How we laughed when our parents tied us to chairs and went out drinking. Oh, they were great times.
Classic.
Once they went for 3 days. It's hilarious.
Yeah, then these people are basically Vince Vaughn in the beginning of True Detective Season 2. And you're like, no, this is bad, man. Do you want a hug or Valium?
So, yes, very odd house.
It's weird. And I think it's interesting because, like, this is both these stories come from completely unrelated people. So I think it's fascinating that obviously a couple different generations of total strangers have experienced something strange there. Although I did notice that it was referred to as a House of the Rising Sun. And I assume you're familiar with that term?
Would that be a den of iniquity?
It would, yes.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to see the old terms are still in use.
Yeah. And so this reminded me of something that happened when I was a kid. There was this one house, I think it might even still be there, I don't know, but it was on a bank overlooking the ball fields in Revelstoke. It's not easily visible from the main floor, or sort of like from the road. You kind of have to, I think there's maybe like a very small part of it that's visible from the road. But when you go down, it's quite an impressive house. And again, or it was, I don't know if it's still there, but I remember I asked my grandfather about it because I was a kid. I was, walking around, kind of prowling around the hill like kids do, exploring. And I found this big house and I said, why is it kind of down there? And one of the things my grandpa said, he's like, oh, that used to be the cat house, which is, of course, another term for a brothel. But me as a child, I didn't know that. So I just thought there was a bunch of cats there. So I went back. I wanted to go see the cats.
Yes, they just used to call them knocking shops here. It does what it says on the tin, really, doesn't it?
I was going to say, yeah, no, there's no beating around that bush. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, moving on. Before we go on to the next little story, on the outskirts of Portage La Prairie, there's Fort La Reina Museum, and it's basically 25 buildings. It's a sort of a complex, I guess you'd say, all built between the late 1800s and 1940. And from what I understand, 4 of the buildings there have pretty steady accounts of haunting. One of them is the train car used by Sir William Van Horn, and apparently the former bedroom of Van Horn. Objects are apparently given to moving, and the clothing, kind of similar actually to what we were talking about before, Garry, the clothing can sometimes be found in disarray as well. And so we have 2 more little stories from Portage La Prairie. One is the Red River College building on Saskatchewan Avenue. And again, this is just a very, very small fragment. But this witness says, 3 of us were standing there at the north-facing entrance doors, which are double doors with 3 stairs going up to them. The outside doors didn't open, but we heard 3 footsteps, and the inside doors, which have doorknobs, they're not opened by pressure bars. You have to turn the knob all the way. They opened all the way. There was no one there opening them. They shut also on their own. That was the entirety of the experience.
It's not like the doors are opening up and going, "Get out!" right? That'd be frightening. If it's good, like, if it just opens up, we go, oh, that's good. Well done.
There's not much going on in Manitoba, Paul. You know, these things, it's all about gradations. Maybe it's, you know, it's like in Star Trek, Spock raising an eyebrow was like the equivalent of him screaming. Things are so boring that in Manitoba, the opening of a door by itself is the equivalent of it going, get out.
Yeah, maybe it's just politely opening the door, going, you know, take the hint. Go on. Go on. Go on.
Please fuck off. Sincerely, the ghosts of this establishment. So we have one other from Portage La Prairie, and it is called growling. Not growler, that's very different. In 1997... There it is. we have such a delay here, folks. I was like waiting for Paul to laugh at that, and I thought, did he not think it was funny? You know, delays are just terrible for your self-confidence when you're telling jokes.
I've just got Bo Selector in my head now,
and let's make sure it stays there. But anyway, so growling. In 1997, when I was about 6 years old in grade one, I had an older box TV that was controlled with knobs. One day, me and my younger sister were alone in my room playing with our toys after I got home from school. Suddenly, we heard this unique growl that I can't quite describe coming from the television set. We got so scared and ran downstairs to tell our dad, who was watching TV and drinking. Oops, sounds like small town Canada in the 80s, or 90s rather. He just laughed and said, that's nothing. Thanks, Dad. He didn't believe us at all. So we went back up there after a little while because it was bedtime. I went in my room and I was inspecting the TV and knocking on the wooden sides of it, and I noticed a tiny hole the size of a finger poked into the top of it through the wood. I looked on my floor, I saw some crayons and decided to drop it inside. And when I did, I instantly heard the same growl again. I ran downstairs, my dad brought me back upstairs and made me go to bed there anyways. I started hearing the growls in the basement after I would play down there alone, and I swear my mom heard it too because she said, "What are you doing down there?" right after I heard it. It was the scariest and weirdest part of my childhood. I remember it very, very vividly, and I didn't keep that TV in my room for long. The whole house was weird, and I still have no clue what caused it. It stands right next to an old military building that was built in 1912 called the Portage Armory, so I don't know if that's related or not, but that house was haunted and remains so to this day. All right, so like we said, ghost stories in Manitoba were thin on the ground, and we didn't just want to read that haunted Manitoba book full stop beginning to end, because there was a very real chance that that could have been the entire episode. So we're going to pivot to some of the other high strangeness that Manitoba is known for. And Paul is going to tell us about not only Manitoba's best known UFO sighting, but I would say probably Canada's most famous UFO sighting, is it not?
Ooh, that's a controversial take.
Okay. So in addition to Falcon Lake, what would you say is the closest one?
Shag Harbor.
Of course, yes, of course. Okay.
Oddly happened in the same year.
Interesting.
I think. Was Shag Harbor 67 as well?
1967.
Yes. So you have probably Canada's two best, or certainly most well-known UFO cases happening in the same year, which I find quite remarkable, really.
That does seem to be significant.
It does. I mean, it's not... I mean, they were, I think, about 6 months apart, because Falcon Lake happened in the spring of 67, and Shag Harbor happened in the autumn of 67. Obviously, Falcon Lake's in Manitoba and Shag Harbor's in Nova Scotia. But they are fascinating that sometimes you will hear people who don't really know much about UFOs or ufology in general who seem to think it's just an American delusion, which I find bafflingly dumb under any circumstances. It's essentially saying, I don't know anything about ufology, but I'm going to tell you how little I know by making such stupid statements. But Falcon Lake's a weird one because it's a very strange case, because Stefan Mashalak, or Michalik, I've heard his surname pronounced several times, was...
Probably Michalik.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always pronounce it Stefan Michalik, but over the years I've heard so many... I suppose it depends where you come from, how you pronounce it, but obviously he was a Polish immigrant who was a former police officer. So he was a very sort of switched-on, intelligent man. He was used to dealing with difficult situations in his past life. But he'd kind of become something of an amateur geologist. And so he just liked to take himself off into the wilderness and go looking for minerals and things. And this one particular day, he found himself in a particular spot near Falcon Lake and watched as two torpedo-like objects appeared above the lake and sort of came down by the side of it. And he was convinced that they were American secret planes of some description that were having mechanical issues. And so he sort of went over to try and speak with them and see if they needed any assistance by saying, I think he said something like, "Are you okay there, Yankee boys?" Because he was convinced it was an American secret thing, not an alien spaceship. And this is the thing about the case has often been described as him encountering aliens and talking about this. He never once said he saw an alien, ever. People have said, because he claimed to have heard, because essentially a door opened and he could hear like muffled voices, and that's what prompted him to start talking. And he spoke in English, and he didn't get any response. I mean, this shows the intelligence of the man. So he spoke to them in English, and didn't respond. So then he went, "Oh well, I'll try Polish." No. Russian. No. German. No. And so here's a man wandering about who's fluent in 4 languages. None of it worked, which is an odd thing anyway. And he just kept saying he could hear this weird hissing, and there was a lot of heat being emanated from it. And then the next thing, as he got closer, he basically put on some goggles and he was looking through and looking through these portholes on the side of the craft. And as he was doing this fire shot out of the grill on the side, or heat or something, and caught him full in the chest, knocked him flying. The vehicles, spaceships, secret planes, wherever they were, departed, and Michalik was left to deal with it. And it took him a while, obviously, to come round. He managed to stagger. I think he ended up getting this is the weird thing about this. He was one of those old-fashioned people that he'd clearly been severely injured by something. But he didn't go to hospital straight away. I think he was intercepted wandering, looking bedraggled on the highway by a police officer. And that's when they noticed that he was all burnt and everything. And he got a bus home and started feeling ill at home, and then they took him to hospital because his condition began to worsen, and he was covered in burns. He seemed to have some kind of chemical poisoning. He had problems with his breathing. He was covered in a rash. They kept his clothing, his vest that he was wearing, and essentially he has like a weird pattern of dots on his chest. Now, this is one of those incredible skeptical denouncements that you will get in some cases. The skeptical version of this is that he was an alcoholic and he tripped up drunk whilst having a barbecue in the woods and landed on it, and that's what burnt him.
Okay, that's a reach.
Well, if it makes sense for somebody, then good for them. I mean, it's stupid, it's ludicrous, and just because something's based in reality doesn't mean it makes sense.
Oh, of course. No, like I said, that sounds ludicrous.
And it's one of those things you'll often see in these cases, that at the end of the day, Stefan was obviously... Skeptics tend to view anybody who's not a white atheist as lacking intelligence, shall we say. A white male atheist seems to be a bit simple in their minds for a lot of them. I don't care what anybody says. And but he was absolutely adamant of what happened to him, and the fact, like I say, he never once claimed it was aliens or he claimed it was a UFO, but as in it was an unidentified flying object, not a spaceship. And he stuck to that story. But his family have often said that when he came back from the hospital, he was really ill for ages. He was in bed. He lost weight. And essentially, he seemed to be emitting a sulfuric smell from his pores. Like when he breathed, when he sweated, this smell of sulfur would just fill the bedroom. And he, like I say, he stuck to the story all his life. He never changed it, never elaborated it, other people have done it. Other people have said, oh, once again, the witness is incorrect. I know what happened to him. It's one of those. But it's a fascinating case because you've got evidence, you've got a switched on witness, you've got other people seeing him, you've got a guy who's ended up in hospital for treatment for a severe injury and continued to tell the same story until the day he died, which wasn't that long ago. I think it was about, let me check, when did he pass away? Yeah, so he died in 1999, he was 83. And so he always said it. I mean, even the following year, he was readmitted into hospital and he ended up going down to Rochester for treatment. He was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, who said that he was very pragmatic, very down to earth, and simply didn't make up stories. And like people have said, oh, well, he must have hoaxed it, but he was a blue collar mechanic in Canada. That's what he did. His gloves were burnt, his shirt was burnt, some of his tools that he had for rock hounding were damaged. They never determined how they'd been burnt. The area itself, when the police went there was a big space that had been burnt, that nothing grew. It had all been burnt away. Something had clearly been there. And so the official police investigation into it marked it as unexplained. They couldn't explain what had happened to him. And, as I say, everybody who spoke to him just found him a very down-to-earth, matter-of-fact man who'd had a very strange experience.
And with all these things, and I think with genuine phenomenon, that's probably the hardest thing about it is it happens, and you're left with no frame of reference. Whether it's a haunting, whether it's UFO, whether it's a cryptid sighting, once it happens, you are just on your own. There's zero closure.
Oh, yeah.
And, in these cases where people are injured by UFOs or by ghosts, there's no fucking recourse. Who do you tell? You can't, there's no one you can complain to because everyone's going to think you're a lunatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they were pillared by the local community. I think the son was bullied at school over it. They had problems with jobs. People stopped sort of employing the mad Stefan. We don't want to give him any work or anything. I mean, he managed to get his life back onto track, but he was one of those people. He didn't go out and talk about it, but if somebody came up and asked him about it, he'd tell them what happened.
Right. I'm always eager to hear from those people because I tend to put more stock in what they have to say than anyone else.
Yeah. But, at the end of the day, he didn't fall on a barbecue.
Yeah, that is absolute nonsense.
It's up there with the erupting tree stump from the bottom of a lake explanation for the photo of Champ.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Easy peasy. Problem solved.
Yeah. One thing I've never been able to find any footage of ever happening.
Of a tree stump rocketing itself up from the bottom of a lake. Yeah, I do wonder sometimes people will just pull this shit out of their ass and expect you to be like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. Actually, it reminds me of another podcast I was listening to. They were talking about James Randi because you and I were talking off air about how neither of us think very much of him. They were talking about how with Randi, he will show you, or he would have showed people, this is how they could have done it. This is how I would simulate what they have claimed to have legitimately captured. And because he could provide a simulation of it, he considered that to have therefore been invalidated. Like, your thing is not real because I was able to make a version of it. And it reminded me of a ghost hunting show I saw a long time ago where they would do that. They would take footage and then they would try and replicate the footage. And I don't remember if it was Paranormal Caught on Camera. It was a while ago, but there was a case where it was like these people were in a bed.
Oh, yes.
And
I know what you're talking about. I've seen that program. It's called Fact or Faked.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah. And so they construct this elaborate apparatus to simulate that footage. And as I recall, they cut a hole in the bed and they insert some kind of machine in there. And in the end, they go, look, we managed to make it look just like that. So it's obviously faked. And I'm like, well, no, man, that's like pissing on me and telling me it's raining. Like, it's functional. Yeah, it's warm water, but it's not rain. You can simulate a thing. Just because you can simulate a thing does not mean you have created the thing.
Yeah, because it was two women as well, wasn't it? That one. It was a woman essentially levitating up in bed.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was a levitation.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about because the explanation is exactly what they said. Oh, well, we can't prove it. However, we can do it this way and therefore we think it's a fake. You've just spent 10 grand building a special levitating bed, and you think Barbara and Sarah have done that as well, do you?
Yeah, and they have no follow-up plan. They have no book written ready. Just here's a random thing. I mean, it does make one wonder why they had a camera in the bedroom, but hey, I'm not here to judge.
Well, these are modern times. I think they were recording strange things, weren't they? That's what caused it. Strange things were happening in the bedroom, and they started leaving a camera on. And caught that. Okay. I think that was what they said.
Right.
But yeah, that was there was a couple of seasons of that. I'm trying to think what the main guy was. The main guy in it has ended up becoming quite well known in ufology circles. I think he used to work for the FBI. It's called Ben something. I've forgotten his surname.
Oh, okay.
Ben Hansen, that's it. He was the lead guy. There was like a team of 6, and they do 2 or 3 cases every episode. I mean, some of them were quite clearly bollocks. Like the Mexican Bruja one was clearly somebody just wanging a bag on a piece of string somewhere. And I'm just thinking, why are we wasting time? This is obviously not real.
And honestly, I think at this point in the genre, I just think there's not much point to paranormal footage. Like, that's a separate conversation entirely. But I mean, you look at Facebook now; it's so full of AI garbage, just people generating shit. And admit it, some of it looks fairly uncanny. Like you can't tell. Or it's very difficult to tell if first glance. Yeah,
there's a cryptozoology group I'm in, and somebody had started sharing this footage the other week, and it was absolute dog shit. I mean, it was so badly done. It was, people with cataracts could have spotted it. It was that bad. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I've caught this footage," and everybody's like, "What?" And they just banned him. No, we're not having this in here, mate. Bye.
The thing I don't understand is, what do people think they're going to get from that? Because at some point that footage is going to be subjected to scrutiny. So even if some rube in a Facebook group goes, "Oh wow, I believe this," at some point someone whose brain is attached to their eyes is going to look at this and go, "No, this was shit out by Sora or Kling or whatever."
Why do people still talk about Amityville as if it was real?
Oh, that's fair. That's fair, Paul. That's fair.
There's money in bullshit.
Yeah. No, that is true. Now that I'm good and sad, let's look at a couple other UFO cases from Manitoba. So these come from a CBC article from 2015, and they actually the examples have been given to CBC by Chris Rutkowski.
Yes.
And I can't remember, has Chris been on your show?
No, not yet. I would love to have him on. He's probably, you would suggest, Canada's premier ufologist. Now
he absolutely is.
Since Stanton's sad demise several years ago.
Yeah, I remember, I can't remember how this came about, but when I was first researching Strange, I was looking into the possibility of doing like freedom of information requests on weird, anomalous stuff. And they basically told me like, yeah, we don't even keep records of those anymore. And if anyone comes to us with this stuff, we send them to this guy. And it was Chris.
Not surprised.
And we actually exchanged emails back then. He was very patient with me. I was a dipshit, and he was very, very kind. So I've got nothing but respect for Chris. But so these are some of the examples that Chris provided to CBC. So on April 10th, 1975, Bob and Elaine Diemert were walking from their farmhouse to their private airfield in Carman and saw a big red light coming at them. It had a dome on top and was pulsing. The Diemerts continued to see saucer-shaped objects a few more times. Then, beginning on May 7th, 1975, nightly sightings began that lasted for months. People gathered at the couple's field for UFO watching parties and to spot Charlie Red Star as it skimmed over trees on the horizon before soaring overhead. Another one was March 4th, 1977. Mr. S was driving eastward towards his farm near sundown when he saw a vibrating and shimmering oval source of light about 5 meters directly ahead of him. It made no noise and did not look to be solid. He continued driving and came upon 3 people standing on the road before him. He said they were about 5 feet tall and shaped like bowling pins. He also said they had bulbous heads, a narrow neck, and a flared body like a skirt. No features were visible. He couldn't brake and drove right over them. He said he felt no impact and they seemed to disappear when they touched the front bumper. As someone, though, who is shaped like a bowling pin, I feel kind of called out by this. Actually, I guess if anything, I'm shaped more like those stubby little bottles of beer that they like, the Jamaican beer, the Red Stripe.
Red Stripe.
Are you a fan?
I have been known to drink more than I should have that in the past.
Okay, all right.
Red Stripe, you work out your capacity very quickly.
Right.
Especially here, because they sell it in half-litre cans here.
Oh, God.
Whoa. Get that down your neck.
All right. Well, before we take a break for some sweet Red Stripe, we're sponsored by them, but hey, guys, we're open to it. There's three more. We've got one on October 9th, 1989. A family was visiting the Fort White Nature Center at 2:50 p.m. when they saw a white boomerang-shaped object hanging in the air over Winnipeg. The children were told to get into the car so they wouldn't see the frightening craft. As adults watched, the object slowly rotated and showed a bulge on its underside. Paul, this entire episode is trying to lure me into making cheap jokes to make up for the fact that we have very few ghost stories, and I will not take the bait any more than I already have.
Yes, there's a lot of innuendo to be made out of some of these reports, isn't there?
There sure is.
Thankfully, we always hold a high line of decency.
I feel like we shouldn't start lying to the audience now after all these years. And then we have another one that's going to, again, take some restraint. November 1st, 1992, Karen, a nurse living in Winnipeg, was wakened at about 2 a.m. by a loud thump on her door. She got up and found two little people, about 3.5 tall, in the living room. They had large round eyes but no other features. They wore long white gowns or robes. They told her, via telepathy, that they wanted to take her for a ride into space. Karen said she was next in a large hangar-like room that contained a cigar-shaped craft. She and the two beings got in. She saw a control room with chairs, screens, and buttons. The creatures pushed the buttons, and she soon saw many stars on the screen. Suddenly, she found herself back in her room. And then finally, February 25th, 2012, it was about 7 p.m. when two witnesses in Winnipeg observed a flat, disc-shaped object with red lights around its perimeter. It was flying horizontally but turned on its side and darted towards their vehicle. The craft vanished before their eyes when it was within 5 meters of them. So those are 5 of the Manitoba-based sightings, according to Canadian UFO expert Chris Rakowski, as of July 15th, or 16th rather, 2015. And I'm just kind of curious, do some of those or any of them sound similar to things you've encountered before?
Yeah, absolutely. The demons case is quite well known, actually, because it was quite an odd one, because it seemed to be one of those where they were the epicenter of a flap. It was happening over their homestead. And so it was quite peculiar that you don't usually get regular returning visitation. Sometimes you might get certain areas where there's a lot of sightings going on, but not so specifically tied to a particular family, it would seem.
Interesting. And so what were the nature of the visitations?
They just kept getting buzzed by strange objects in the sky.
Oh, weird.
Because I know they were thinking, at one point, they were thinking it was because they got an airstrip, and they thought that may be what was attracting them. And people said, oh, well, perhaps it was just, drug runners or something looking for somewhere to land. And they would say, well, no, because we were seeing a flying saucer. We weren't seeing a plane.
Right.
We're telling you what we've seen. That's not a plane. And as far as I'm aware, I know they've got a lot of money, drug cartels, but I don't think they've managed to invest in some flying saucers.
I mean, they apparently they have Predator drones. So, they're all well on their way.
I was watching something about Escobar the other day, and the money involved in that just blows my mind.
Oh, yeah. It's like I told you, I subscribe to that one reporter's Substack, and some of the shit he talks about with those guys is crazy.
400 million a week.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was then.
15 tons of coke a day.
Man, those are Jean-Claude Van Damme numbers.
The Interlake. These stories have been condensed from Haunted Manitoba by Matthew Comas. The Interlake is the region between Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg, and home to fishing and farming communities such as Gimli, Arborg and Riverton. The region was first settled by Icelandic immigrants in the late 1800s, at a time when Iceland was experiencing devastating volcanic eruptions. The ashfall was ruining crops and killing livestock, leaving thousands with no way to feed their families. A mass exodus of the island took place, with many Icelandics coming to Manitoba. The first year of the settlement was very difficult, and settlers suffered outbreaks of disease and a lack of food. They would likely not have made it through those initial years without the assistance of the indigenous peoples who were already living in the area. The indigenous communities provided invaluable instruction on how to farm, fish and hunt in Manitoba. Tragically, the diseases brought by the settlers claimed countless indigenous lives, and with the population dramatically reduced, many of the First Nation survivors were forced off their lands to live on reserves located farther north along the lakeshore. Ness Cemetery, near the community of Riverton, which was originally known as Lundy, is located on the Icelandic River, approximately 5 kilometres upstream from Lake Winnipeg. The river provides easy access to the lake for fishing and transportation, and the Ness Cemetery, located just north of the village on the eastern banks of the river, is easy to miss. It is both a desolate and alluring location. Across the river are old fishing vessels slowly rusting away, and the area is often teeming with birds. You'd never know it's a cemetery, except for a stone angel erected by a local heritage group back in 2010, and the angel now keeps watch over the countless unmarked graves. The exact number of people buried in the cemetery is unclear, but the Icelandic River Heritage Sites organisation estimates that somewhere between 70 to 100 graves are there. It's also thought that the site at Ness had been used as a burial ground for indigenous peoples. Whether this was before the settlement or only during the smallpox outbreak is unknown. It's also unclear how many First Nations people are interred here. There's no documentation for the indigenous burials, but approximately 30 Icelandic burials are known. Neither the Icelandic nor indigenous graves have gravestones, but were originally marked with logs. Whilst no records exist of the people buried at Ness, there is a list of those buried during the smallpox epidemic. This epidemic had a devastating effect on New Iceland, and several sites were required to bury all the dead, and the Ness Cemetery served the Riverton area. The disease claimed the lives of 20 people from nearby communities. Smallpox hit the area's children especially hard, and 3/4 of the burials were children, ranging in age from a few weeks old to 13. By the early 1880s, the population of the settlement had dropped, and the local congregation was no longer active, resulting in the cemetery being neglected, and to make matters worse, the land was extremely prone to flooding. The idea of living in a house next to a cemetery would creep most people out. The idea of building a house right on top of a cemetery is even more appalling. However, this notion did not seem to trouble Magnus Hallgrimsson, as he had originally settled on Hecla Island, but in the early 1880s was looking for a new farmstead closer to the village. He may have selected Ness due to the Nesgill Creek on the south side of the property. This provided easy access to the river and a safe harbour for his boat. Whatever his reasons, Magnus showed little respect for the site, as he removed all the wooden burial markers and built his house right in the middle of the cemetery, and he even dug down into the ground to construct a cellar. Magnus was clearly not one to believe in superstitions or ghosts, and perhaps tempting fate, he named the farmstead Nastrond, the shore of corpses. An interesting choice, as in Norse mythology, it's the name for a place in the afterlife where the murderers, adulterers and perjurers reside. Perhaps the name was even too dark for Magnus, because it was later renamed Graftanus, which means burial point, though in daily usage the site was simply referred to as Ness. His choice to live at Ness proved to be a poor one, as in 1890 Magnus died a gruesome and painful death caused by a bleeding tumour, and soon after this his widow and children left the farmstead, never to return. Several spooky incidents have happened at the site and are recalled in the Icelandic River Saga, including the story of Gutmur John Gutmursson, who lived at the farmstead directly south of Ness. He often had to pass by the site on his way home. He had heard all the stories and was always leery whenever he got close to the abandoned house. This house was one of those strangely eerie places, and all the more so because of the cellar. On one occasion, though, I happened to accompany some young lady home after an evening's entertainment, and our way lay by the old house. Just as he was passing by the Ness farmstead, he heard a voice call out to him, "Won't you come in? Come in." Now, being a smart lad, he did no such thing. Instead, He took off running as fast as he could go. He even said he waded through a swamp up to the crotch of his good pants rather than go anywhere close to it. He burst through his front door, soaked to the skin and shaking with fear. His family wondered what had happened, but they all understood when he told them about the eerie voice. The boy wasn't the only person to end up soaking wet trying to avoid the sinister place. Across the river from Ness was another farmstead. Here lived Sigmundur and Johanna in a small 2-story log home. At night they began to see lights moving around the empty house. Unsure if it was someone taking shelter in the now abandoned home, or if something more sinister was taking place, Sigmundur decided to row across the river to find out. And Johanna, obviously the more sensible one, wouldn't even hear of it, even after Sigmundur offered to bring his Bible along. Most of the area's residents had common enough sense not to get anywhere close to Ness, but that was not true for everyone. One farmer who did not give any credence to the ghost stories was granted permission to cut hay from the meadows at Ness. After a long day's work, he was not looking forward to having to row back down the river to his homestead, and instead he decided to spend the night in the abandoned farmhouse. The next morning, curious villagers asked if anything had happened during the night. He laughed at their questions and said he'd had a very restful sleep. The following night, however, there was a pounding on the door of the neighbouring farm. It was the same farmer, asking for shelter for the night. He looked very pale and was clearly unnerved by something, but refused to say what. When asked what happened, he remained quiet, and he continued to cut the hay at Ness during the year, but never again set foot in the house. The most spine-chilling events was when one witness saw a group of black creatures emerge from the house. Some people suspected that the Uppvankingur occupied the home. The Uppvankingur are animated corpses known to live in their graves. They're different from ghosts in the way that they have a physical body and immense strength. And not long after the sightings of these creatures, a horse was found dead in a nearby pasture. Most of these stories are over 100 years old, but outside of the supernatural, the site still holds many dangers today. It's easy to fall as the land is marshy and the riverbank is eroding away. The location has been neglected for generations, and due to that erosion, bones and skulls often come up to the surface. These skeletal remains have been turned over to the province for reburial. Local residents would like to see riverbank protection, new landscaping, and a monument to recognise all that are buried here. Some recent visitors to Ness continue to experience strange things. They've heard a voice calling out to them. They say that the voice is soft and calm as it tries to draw them deeper into the swamp, just like that young lad experienced over 100 years ago.
And I managed to find a story from Interlake, specifically from the town of Gimli, and it's sort of interesting how it lines up with what you were just talking about. So I found this on Facebook from a woman named Ruth, and Ruth says, by Gimli, we saw one, by one she means a ghost, wearing a wedding dress. It ran out in front of my car. I thought I hit her. When I ran out, there was nothing there. My mom was with me. She saw it too. It was freaky. So yet again, we have another disappearing spirit, but and also I think a validation of what the author is talking about there.
I'm mystified as to why smallpox was still a big thing in the late 19th century.
I mean, measles are a big thing right now in southern Ontario, and that shouldn't be a problem either, but here we are.
Yes, smallpox is a strange thing. Thanks to milkmaids, we got the cure, if you know that story.
I do not.
So they were trying to find out, because smallpox was obviously a very virulent and deadly disease, which would spread like wildfire. And was it Edward Jenner, I think, was the guy who discovered the smallpox vaccine? He realised that cowpox was quite... It's a similar family of diseases. And what he noticed was that milkmaids didn't get smallpox. They seemed immune to it, and he couldn't work out why. And then he realised that what was happening was that the milkmaids were getting cowpox naturally through their job.
Okay.
And that was inoculating them from smallpox. And so he worked out that if you extracted cowpox, that would help him create the vaccine to get rid of smallpox. And that's where it came from.
Oh, okay.
So cows didn't give us just milk.
They gave us a smallpox vaccine.
Nobody offers them the Nobel Prize for medicine, do they?
No wonder they tried to kill you.
Hey, I'm on their side. I think that's a great achievement. I want them to have that Nobel Prize for medicine with Jenner. You know, they should say that. So it's incredible sometimes when you read about this. And I think it's one of those things like the Icelandic immigration is not known about, really, because Iceland's got this reputation of being the land of fire and ice as it is now. But essentially, it's stuff's always blowing up and erupting there, and they had some really bad ones. So a lot of them had to move out, and very quickly, because they essentially had their farms were being turned into lava-strewn ruins. Really, it's remarkable. But it's odd that they chose to go to Canada, which is quite strange.
Yeah, and there is a whole other story there. I'm going to try to remember to include a link in the show notes. It's an article from the Winnipeg Free Press called "The Ghosts of New Iceland," and it just details how all these people from Iceland filled up this interlake area, and then not just as quickly, but over time, eventually, a lot of them drifted away. So there's there's a number of ghost towns in and around there. And if you look at Winnipeg or Manitoba's demographic makeup, the Icelandics are way, way down near the bottom now. So obviously, yeah, it didn't stick.
It's interesting, because you would think common sense would say, well, why don't they move back to Scandinavia? You know, Norway or Sweden or Denmark. I mean, they probably wouldn't have wanted to move to Finland. As the jokes all in Scandinavia, Finland tend to be the butt of them, which I find a bit unfair of them. But having been there, I was told a Dane and a Norwegian both told me a joke where the punchline involves somebody from Finland. So clearly it's a well-established thing in Scandinavia. But I just find that odd that you would move all the way over to Canada when you could just hop over somewhere fairly similar where your cultures are quite similarly aligned.
I wonder if it's because of the availability of land. I mean, I wonder, if in Scandinavia, at that point, you're dealing with, well, you have to buy the land from someone. You can't just stake a claim. Whereas, in Manitoba, especially at that time, there would have been fuck all there.
Do you think that they actually didn't disappear? They were all eaten by Manipogo?
I mean, I'm not saying no, because I think when you tell everyone the story of Manipogo, I think they may agree that it's a very real possibility.
Well, the thing about Manipogo is... it's basically ripped off Ogopogo. And they said, oh, well, there's a water monster scene here, and it's in Lake Manitoba, so we'll call it Manipogo, like Ogopogo. And this is one of those where people have said, once again, that anybody who's seen this is an idiot. Because what they're seeing is beavers or a moose or any number of things. However, the stories go all the way back to the First Nation tribes in the area. They have been spoken about for generations and generations, going back hundreds of years. I think the first white person to see one had a wonderful name. It's called Valentine something.
Okay.
So you would imagine that this chap would know where a beaver was, because Valentine was a very well-known fur trader and hunter. That's how he made his money. He said he saw a giant creature. This is only about 100 years ago. I think it's the beginning of the 20th century. But he said, I saw an enormous serpentine creature on the surface of the lake. One would suspect a fur trader and hunter would know where a beaver or a moose swimming looks like.
One would think.
Really. And so ever since then, you've had lots and lots of sightings from, obviously, people, tourists, all kinds of things. There is actually a photo that was taken in 1962, I think, by was he a journalist or a television presenter? And it basically looks like a giant worm. It's very odd.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's the only photo, I believe, that's been caught. But once again, people say, oh, well, it's a sturgeon. People are seeing sturgeon. None of the witnesses, they describe a serpentine creature. I mean, some of the descriptions say it looks like a horse or a cow or a moose. And it makes a weird noise, which is why people say, oh, well, it's a moose swimming, because mooses grunt and huff and puff when they're swimming across waters. I don't know, like they've given themselves like pep talks like, I can do it in moose or
We've
something.
all done that when we're swimming or trying to get out of bed.
Yeah, and so that's not what people report though. So it is a fascinating one because once again it's one of those that tends to get overlooked. But there's even a park there. There's a Manipogo Park, where I think most of the sightings have been reported. I think it's on the North Shore, and so they've built the park there to represent the best place. If you want to see Manipogo, that's the place to go.
Very cool. Well, I do love a lake monster, and again, I was actually not aware of Manipogo until we started researching the show.
Well, apparently, Lake Manitoba is connected to Lake Winnipeg.
Oh, okay.
And there's a lake monster seen in Lake Winnipeg, but everybody thinks it's Manipogo. They think it's the same thing because there's reports of a giant creature seen in Lake Winnipeg as well. But because they're connected, they think they're the same thing. And
if I recall, one of those lakes is particularly huge. It's like the 10th largest inland sea in the world. I can't remember which.
Absolutely, plenty of room for something unknown to hide away, especially in these certain sparsely populated locations, you know. And once again, you have indigenous peoples that are very aware of the fauna and flora around them. You know, these guys hunted. That's what kept them going. They ate the animals around them to survive. I'm pretty sure that the tribespeople would know what a sturgeon was.
One would think.
But no, apparently not. Everybody's an idiot. Again.
Well, while Paul and I go find some skeptics to wedgie, we're going to take a quick break to give you guys some ads. Welcome back. So for our last segment, we are going to read another selection of 3 very small stories. Like we said, first-person accounts were thin on the ground in Manitoba. So we have some smaller stories, and then we have what might be one of the most ridiculous things we've ever looked at on this show. Paul and I found this piece on, what'd you call this, Paul?
Well, they claim it is the embodiment and creation of spiritual presences being emitted from the mouths of psychics and spiritualists. Or as I like to call it, bollocks.
All right. We're going to quickly read these 2 little bites, then we're going to talk about psychic experiments at the Hamilton House.
Psychic bollocks.
Yeah. Psychic bollocks at the Hamilton House.
With Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Just taking a hot, steamy piss all over Sherlock Holmes' legacy. All right. So the first 2 stories involve something that we've already kind of covered on the show, but I think it's interesting. It keeps coming up in Winnipeg or in Manitoba. I keep confusing the 2 in Manitoba. So the first is, back when I was younger, I was driving with my mother between St. Anne and Richet along the number 1 highway going east. It was later at night, drizzling a bit. We saw what we thought was a man appear in the middle of the highway where the dotted lines are. We had to swerve away to miss it. Because it happened so fast. When we looked back, no one was there at all. We were pretty spooked. We've never seen anything like that again, but I'll always remember that day. It was especially creepy because we both saw it. And then a second person chimed in along a similar spot. They said, my last car had a sensor that would light up when there was a pedestrian close to the vehicle. It used to light up going down highway number 1 between Lilac and Richet. Various spots and various times. No one was ever there. And it makes me think of those stories about the Tesla that had the pedestrian detection that would allegedly show them on the screen near graveyards.
But now we know they're just thrown together, so it's probably an electrical malfunction.
They're telling the passengers where they're going to end up if they keep driving in a Tesla.
And the last one is this experience where it happened at a small hotel beside a busy highway in Manitoba. They were all sitting in the room, visiting the oldest brother in his town and having a good time. As our niece was trying to show everyone a new gymnastic move she'd learned, I was grabbing food for my mum and I. But when I tried to grab the sauce, it started sliding across the table, slowly and deliberately, as though someone was pushing it with their fingers. I was looking at it, thinking I was seeing things, only to look over to my mum and see her looking at exactly the same thing. We both looked at each other, smiled in awe at what we were witnessing, and then looked back at it. It only slid for a few seconds and it never happened again. After it stopped, I started conducting research, jumping up and down near the table, shaking the table, waving a gust of wind towards it, blowing on it. Nothing. It just didn't budge. It was only when I physically pushed it did it move. We didn't feel scared, though, until a separate encounter happened in the same room. We were all sleeping when a loud noise coming from the bathroom woke my mum up between 3 or 4 a.m. She woke up my dad and he went to check it out, and apparently my face wash had flown off the bathroom counter, even though that was basically impossible. My mum never wanted to stay in that room again, but we still stay in that hotel because the prices are insanely good. So even ghosts can't get in the way of a good bargain.
I've stayed in some real shitholes, Paul, and I would go back because the rates are low. Hotels are expensive these days. I'll never forget the very first time I went to a Holiday Inn Express. I was my very first road trip by myself where I was driving. And I just thought, well, there's a hotel there. I'll pull up to the hotel. It was $150. And I thought, well, we're not doing that shit again. So now this was an article in Heritage Winnipeg. It is no longer on their website. I'm shocked. I can't imagine why that's the case. I pulled it out of the Wayback Machine. So I'm gonna read bits of it to you. The title is Psychic Experiments at Hamilton House, Part 1. We're not gonna fucking bother with Part 2 because Part 1 is stupid enough. On the south end of Henderson Highway in Elmwood sits Hamilton House, a large 2.5-story nod to the classical revival style, which has bore witness to over 100 years of intriguing history. When Dr. Thomas Glendinning Hamilton, along with his wife and daughter, moved into the house in 1910, the address was 185 Kelvin Street. The house quickly became named after the family, with the upstairs serving as their home, the main floor as office space, and Dr. Hamilton's surgery in the basement. Hamilton House at 185 Henderson Highway was the site of many remarkable psychic experiments during the first part of the 20th century. The experiments were conducted by Dr. Glenn Hamilton, Mrs. Lillian Hamilton, and their 3 offspring, daughter Margaret, sons Glenn and James. And now they have a picture of James here, and he kind of looks like the Skarsgård kid from Nosferatu if he was a 3-card Monty dealer. So the Hamilton family papers, the author goes on to say, have been deposited at the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections, and I have derived almost all of this paper from that collection, particularly from the writings of Mrs. Lillian Hamilton and Margaret Hamilton. There are photographs, and I'm going to include the link in the show notes because you desperately need to see some of these photographs. According to the author, most of the psychic research was done from 1920 to 35, and there were examples of table tipping, teleplasmic masses, which are fucking hilarious, and automatic writing. So hundreds of seances were held here, and a great number of photographs recorded the events. So Dr. Hamilton was a respected physician and was an MLA in the riding of Ridgewood from 1915 to 1920. Mrs. Hamilton was a nurse until her marriage, and then she became a wife and mother, as well as a caregiver to Dr. Hamilton's mother. So in 1918, according to Margaret Hamilton, Dad became interested in mental telepathy. He and our minister, Reverend D.N. McLaughlin of King Memorial Church, tried some experiments in mental telepathy where they proved, to their own satisfaction, that thought transference between 2 living minds exists. Now, I just want to throw in here, this is not as stupid as it sounds. I suspect this might have something to do with Upton Sinclair's novel, because Upton Sinclair wrote a book about telepathy experiments with his wife somewhere around that time. And I think it was called Mental Radio or something like that. And he did a number of experiments in which he also proved to his satisfaction that there was something to the possibility of telepathy. I actually do think there is something to telepathy. I don't think that's completely out of pocket, but it has nothing to do with the ludicrous pageantry we're about to see here.
Even from being a kid, and my first sort of stumbling across some of these photographs of these ectoplasmic manifestations, even at 8 or 9 years old, I was like, how the fuck does anybody think this is real? They looked dreadful. They just looked stupid. And the ones, I mean, there's some of these in this article. Some of the pictures in here are so hilariously stupid and clearly fake that I cannot believe. I mean, this is the thing, because all this reboom of spiritualism after the First World War, you know, it's all wrapped up in grief and PTSD and desperation and longing and self-manipulation of reality, I think. And so that's not to dismiss the way some of these people were feeling about what had happened to them, because that's awful. Hundreds of thousands of young men from all around the world died far too young in the First World War. And a lot of people took advantage of that, sadly. And like I've often said, it's very interesting how it happens after the First World War, but you see very little of it after the Second World War, because I think people have become very aware that, I would say, 99.9% of the people in the spiritualist movement in the 20s and 30s were outright frauds on every single level.
I have no problem believing that. Again, I think most of this stuff is nonsense. And the article sort of states that these people got into the possibility of not just mental telepathy, but psychic contact after one of the Hamilton children died of a flu, and basically died of this. I would assume the Spanish flu. It doesn't specifically say that, but he died in 1919 at the age of 3 from the flu. I think it's a very real chance. And the same year that Arthur died of the flu, January 1919, the McLaughlin children, so the kids of the Reverend who he experimented with mental radio with, were also sick. Dr. McLaughlin was staying up with him to give his wife a rest. He went into his study late at night, and he saw his dead sister sitting at his desk. So he told Dr. Hamilton about this. Dr. Hamilton was interested in this kind of thing, and they went to speak to someone named Professor Allison, who was teaching at United College, who believed in the communication of a woman from St. Louis who claimed to be a living woman who had passed through death. And so in 1921, they started experimenting with mediumship. This went on to involve a total of 9 mediums, the 2 most active of which were a woman named Elizabeth Poole and another named Mary Marshall. The photo they have here of Dr. and Mrs. Hamilton, I'm going to be honest with you, they look like the kind of people who'd be taken in by this shit. They look like the kind of people who would be like, hey, we saw you across the bar, we'd love to buy you a drink. Got Ed and Lorraine Warren vibes, is what I'm saying. And during the seances, Mrs. Poole, one of these mediums, took on the trance condition, and she would do automatic writing. So later, of course, there was Mary Marshall, and by the time we get to 1932, things have, just like with everything, they have progressed to the point where it is ridiculous. So there is a photograph from March 6th, 1932, depicting a teleplasmic mass attached to the mouth of the medium Mary Marshall. And again, a teleplasmic mass is like, I don't even fucking know. It's like
ectoplasm,
a watered up handkerchief.
Cheesecloth.
Exactly. Yeah, it's meant to be ectoplasm. It is cheesecloth. But what makes this so funny is that
she's spewing out Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's face.
Yeah. It is meant to be the eyes of an individual named Walter. It is the dumbest shit in the world. And yeah, I'm not totally sure who Walter is meant to be, but his eyes, it honestly, folks, it looks like they just cut around the eyes of a photograph and stuck it into this cheesecloth. It is
because that's what they did.
Why?
There's no magic here, mate.
Fair.
That's exactly what they did. The cheating, lying bastards.
Oh man! Prior to the photo, Walter had indicated a bell would ring to give the signal for the image to be taken.
That's lucky, isn't it? I'm ready now. Ding, ding, ding.
True. There's a picture here of what appears to be a table levitating. That the caption says "True levitation, non-contact." And honestly, the table is at such an angle, and everyone's like moving away from it. It looks like the pit at a punk show, like it's just like you're at a house show, and suddenly they've decided to destroy the house.
I notice how, though, this is the thing with these things. Even, I'm not dismissing telekinesis out of hand at all, because there are things that have happened that, yeah, there's something there. This is one of those photos that's a prime example of fakery, because you can see that it's going, it's held at, the table is moving at such an angle that it has to be being pulled up by something because of the way it is. Because if it was levitating, it would rise. It wouldn't be shooting off towards the wall at an angle, which it is. And the other picture is doing exactly the same. They're being pulled.
It's levitating at great speed, Paul. Like Buzz Lightyear, it's falling with style.
I have to say, my favourite picture of these in the article is the one where she's spewing out Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's face.
Oh, it's the best thing in the world. It is, folks, again, I'm going to post this link in the show notes. You have to look at it. I don't even have words. Again, the fact that someone was allegedly fooled by this, what is very clearly a small photo of Arthur Conan Doyle's just like his smiling face, in just like crudely pasted into this massive cloth. It is embarrassing.
And I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to fake. I mean, and it just, I just find it incredible that you had these allegedly learned people who had essentially ended up in a circle jerk of bollocks, trying to see whose face they could put in some cheesecloth. I mean, this is less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
It's...
I don't know, man. I've fallen for some dumb shit in my life, but even I think I would look at this and go, no.
No. I'm not having it. Not having it. And I'm trying to work out if teleplastic mass is when they do an ectoplasmic release, but it involves images, or it's the new term, because as soon as you say the word ectoplasm, people just go, not interested, mate. But if you say teleplastic mass, people aren't really sure about it, and they might go, oh, and then they see the picture and go, that's just bollocks, mate.
What I think is great is if you plug teleplasmic mass into Google, you get the fourth one down is a University of Manitoba reference to these experiments. So it's almost like they cooked this shit up just for these, so people, for that exact reason. So people wouldn't go, ectoplasm, it's bullshit.
Let's call it teleplastic mass.
We'll shove this crude illustration of Arthur Conan Doyle in here, and him and that idiot and his wife will
it's a really good night for a rave. Good name for a rave, that, isn't it? Teleplastic mass.
The teleplasmic mass. Yeah.
This month at Teleplastic Mass, DJ Bastard.
So yes, again, this is just a very, very cursory overview of these experiments because they're nonsense. They're not worth you guys spending a lot of time on them. Well, okay. This sad dog and pony show that people did back before they had television.
The thesaurus should sue them for using that word.
I feel like I should be sued just for taking up people's time with this shit, but I again, there weren't many ghost stories, so we had to include it.
I think it's vitally important because it shows the prevalence and power of spiritualism, and I think sometimes people don't understand how damaging it was, and I think it's good to remind people of it. And when you can see these incredible examples of these people's powers, I think it just shows you they're all balmy.
Yeah. And in a way, I think it's good to know that even intelligent, successful people can be taken in by bollocks. Like that's, I think a lot of people assume, well, and we've even sometimes used that as a metric. Like, well, they're intelligent, successful, professional people. And judging by the stories of the Hamilton House, a lot of those folks could be fucking morons.
Yes. Goodbye to them.
On that cheery note, we will bring our Manitoba show to a close. Paul, I'm starting to see why we haven't done more Canada as we go through these provinces, because some of these places, there is not much.
I'm looking forward to the Yukon.
It's going to be you and me getting drunk and singing sea shanties.
Panning for gold.
Oh, hopefully the summer ends before we get to the Yukon.
Fighting off a bear. I'll just spew up Arthur Conan Doyle. That'll scare it away.
Well, that would do it. Man, I wish I could do that on command. Like one of those frilled lizards, but I'm just coughing up cheesecloth full of celebrity photos. Well, again, we hope you have enjoyed this very strange look at the province of Manitoba. And of course, if you have any Manitoba ghost stories, or if we've fucked something up so badly you feel you need to tell us, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories, Sarah Kent, who helps manage our Reddit community, Tanya Downing, who helps manage our Facebook community.
Our paranormal conductor is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, my friend and co-host is the one and only Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I make a return trip to New Zealand in the company of paranormal investigator Mark Wallbank as we go for a little trip around the South Island, which often gets overlooked, and we talk about some of the places he's visited, cases he's been investigating down there, and some of its more notable haunted hotspots.
Very cool. I remember meeting Mark at Parameet.
Yes. Yeah, he's coming back over, I think, next September next year, so we've already arranged to meet up, because he's a smashing fellow. He's a really nice guy.
And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms and all podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm largely the truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you'll find my horror fiction show, Fear Daily, everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, we couldn't do this without our patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers. We deeply appreciate every single one of you. And if you want to get access to ad-free episodes, bonus shows, extra conversations between myself and Paul, our monthly live stream, Ghost Force shoutouts, all kinds of cool stuff, either click the link in the show notes, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or become a friend of the cabin on Apple Podcasts or YouTube, and you can get access to all that good stuff. If you want some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have t-shirts, stickers, all kinds of cool stuff. Again, that's ghoststoryguys.com. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Podzonta Music. Find more from him by searching for Podzonta Music wherever you get your tunes. And I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then...
Into the emptiness of Manitoba we go. Where's Paul Verhoeven when you need him? I saw him at that party once. I could hit Paul Verhoeven before he saw it coming. Just this one's for Canada. Just come right out of the side, snap him in the jaw.
I remembered when people came to the house and put some little orange flags down where some borries. Fucking hell.
My mum made tons of money. Jesus, getting dark. Let's stop. Paul actually exists in that world, so he has to have the respect of people. I can say anything I want because no one takes me seriously as a researcher anyways. I think he's a schmuck.